Welcome to this special episode of the Paal15 Podcast. Today, we are going to be discussing how you can make your partnership with AWS move the needle. And to do that, I'm delighted to be joined by two people who've worked with dozens of AWS partners over the years, Paal15's own Laila Selena and Werner Moysen. Welcome back to the show, guys.
Thanks, Matt.
Morning, Matt.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I think with the AWS Summit coming up in Sydney very soon, it feels like the perfect time to be discussing all this. So yeah, thanks for popping in. I think let's start with a common pattern we see all the time, which is partnerships with AWS that start on the right foot, but somewhere along the line, they get relegated to a sort of side project. The partnership might live with one alliance lead, but the rest of the business becomes a little bit out of sync. Laila, could you explain why that happens so often? And I don't know, maybe point to what organizations could do to avoid the relationship becoming that side project.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, visibility and accountability are extremely important. You know, if these aren't in place, then partnerships start to go wrong. But, you know, what does that really mean? Leadership with marketing need to treat AWS relationship as a strategic motion, not just a checkbox. Because if it's not tied to your pipeline goals, customer expansion, or product roadmap alignment, then is it really a value-add partnership?
Werner, is this kind of similar to the challenges we see more generally across hyperscaler MSP relationships?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's always the difficulty of, well, the MSP having its own agenda and its own business model, right? And then obviously the relationship with a hyperscaler like AWS. That's important, but sometimes, a bit overlooked or put to the back, right? Looking at the dozens of things that an MSP needs to do, right? So, like Laila mentioned, right, it needs to be driven by leadership, and obviously, there needs to be a sort of a clear go-to-market that it becomes an always-on kind of motion, right? Not just one marketing campaign. You actually want to look at the partnership, build propositions that have, in this case, an AWS component in it, and be very clear on what the MSP then adds to that technology to make it a truly unique solution. And also align to certain motions and, for example, the fiscal year of the hyperscaler, right? If you know that the last quarter or something is coming up, make sure you align to that and make sure you're clear on what the hyperscaler sort of expects. Also looking at, for example, programs, right? If there's funding opportunities or co-funding opportunities, be a bit smart about it, right? And make sure that you actually address what the hyperscaler is going to win. In this case, AWS, how's it go to market from the MSP going to drive revenue for AWS? If you're clear on that sort of predicted revenue and predicted outcome for AWS, there's often a bit more opportunity to work more closely together.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting. You mentioned that kind of concept of alignment. And I think, as we all know, AWS is pretty focused on infrastructure and application modernization at the moment. But Laila, I kind of wonder, are most partners at that same point?
Some, yes, but many partners have vertical solutions, SaaS plays, or service portfolios that don't cleanly fit AWS's current go-to-market focus. For us, what we see is that you have to translate your story into their priorities while still keeping your priorities front and center. It's a bit of a balancing act, really.
Right. So how can partners find that balancing act, I suppose? What can they do when their value proposition isn't quite translating to those AWS priorities? So say they're focused on verticals and not on migrating EC2 workloads.
Yeah. Look, you need to find the intersections. And I know that's easier said than done, especially when you have a lot of spinning plates. But if you can map what you have to what AWS has, then you're investing in both of you. Like in the Netherlands, for example, we work a lot with healthcare tech. If you can map healthcare analytics to AWS health data lake initiatives, and that's just an example, it often means that you need to reframe your message, not completely reinvent it.
Sure. I guess there's another element here with AWS specifically, which is they're well known for launching a new thing seemingly every week. So how can partners kind of decide what is strategic and what's maybe not so relevant to them? What's maybe a distraction? Werner?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think you see that across the board, right? That all hyperscalers are launching innovations, new technologies faster than ever, right? Especially on the AI side, on the agent side. And it's very tricky for MSPs to just sort of jump on that train, right? Oh, I'm fear of missing out. Let's also sell something without sort of clearly thinking about, okay, but how am I going to make money of it, right? You see quite a lot of partners, MSPs going almost back to a bit of a resell mode, just because they're afraid of missing the opportunity to also sell something, or at least that they see that competition is doing that. I think it is all about sort of taking a step back and looking towards your own sort of strategy, right? So, okay, where do I want to be in a year from now? What is my own strategy, and how does a certain solution or technology fit in there? And always think customer first, right? Because if a solution is not necessarily helping the customer, if you're not solving a clear pain for the customer or providing a very clear opportunity for the customer, then in essence, you're going back to selling technology. So thinking through, okay, with this building block that AWS provides me, what proposition am I going to build? How am I going to make money with these propositions? What kind of services and magic am I going to add? And then what is actually my story towards the customer? Thinking that through instead of sort of, let's sell something, let's go to market with something, because otherwise I'm missing out on an opportunity, is often a better approach, right? So take a step back, think about it properly, and then go to market with a clear and structured, well thought through solution.
Right. So it does sound like there's some key things partners can do to kind of set that platform for success in terms of the partnership. But let's head a little further down the road in terms of looking at what a successful partnership looks like in the future. And maybe we could start with what it is that sets a mature AWS partnership apart from an immature one. Werner, if you have any ideas around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like Laila mentioned, right? So a partnership, it's in a word, right? So it's a two-way street, right? So it shouldn't be about AWS coming to a partner with an opportunity and you almost see it as a marketing campaign. A partnership should be about gives and gets, right? Like I said, two-way street. So being clear about, hey, this is how we are going to grow the business together, looking ahead for a full fiscal year, or let's say an H2 that is obviously coming up. And also inform each other on the actions that have been taken, right? So again, it shouldn't be just like a one-off campaign and then hopefully we'll bring in some results later. No, it's about sharing the business view that you have as an MSP with in this case, your AWS partner manager, and then be very clear, okay, this is what we are going to do. How can AWS support me from a business point of view, from a technical point of view, from programs, upskilling, etc. To grow the business together. And I think across the board, and not just with AWS, but also, for example, with Microsoft, you see that the hyperscalers are every year going a bit deeper with fewer partners, right? So if you really want to do this well, make sure you invest in the partnership. Make sure you're top of mind for AWS sellers as well. Right?
And then Laila, if you were, say, advising a Series B ISV on a new AWS partnership, what would you tell them to focus on in the first 90 days?
Interesting you ask, because I do think ISVs is a huge component of the AWS ecosystem. And we obviously do a lot of work with MSPs, as Werner mentioned, but ISVs, it's a really interesting part of AWS specifically, even more than some of the other hyperscalers. And as Werner covered a few times, you do need to get your overarching partnership story straight first. You know, your value propositions, that intersection and solution model I mentioned earlier. But once you have your foundation in place, I would go into audience segmentation. Figure out what AWS region or vertical or segment aligns to your solution and your product sets, and then build one clear co-sell motion. And you can then use it as a framework, templatize a bit. But yeah, I wouldn't go wide from the get-go. Once you get your foundation straight, then deep dive, building scale in a repeatable way.
Nice. Well, Thank you guys. That sounds great. So I think we're about ready to wrap up. But as I mentioned earlier, the AWS Summit in Sydney is fast approaching us now. So, Laila, what's the one thing every AWS sponsor attending should be asking their teams?
Are we clear on the one thing we want from AWS this quarter? And does AWS know it too? We've seen it a lot. If you don't define the value exchange, AWS will define it for you.
Okay, great. I think that's a great thing to ask and remember. So thank you both, Laila and Werner, for joining us on the podcast today. Laila, you'll be at that AWS Summit, won't you?
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking forward to catching many of our friends in Sydney at the event next month. It's, start of June. So if you want to chat a bit more about anything we talked about, shoot me an email. The details, I believe, are in the episode notes or on my LinkedIn, of course.
Amazing. Well, yeah, everyone make sure to reach out to Laila if you are attending. But yeah, that's all from us for now. Thank you guys for joining us, and see you next time on the Paal15 Podcast.
Thanks, Matt.